Let's briefly look at some of the basic controls on Tabletopia. When you load up a game, you'll see that you've got three little icons down here. The volume control. This button with the question mark will bring you a summary of all the different controls available, and this button will show you the rules of the game that you're currently looking at. It's a quick reference PDF that allows you to quickly scan through and catch any rules you might have missed before you played the game. So to move anywhere on the screen, I can click and drag with the left mouse button. I can also click and drag with the right mouse button to change my camera angle. This can be used to move up and down, and left and right. If I want to zoom in on anywhere on the board, I can scroll in with my mouse wheel, and I can scroll out. You can also move around the board with the W, A, S, and D keys. To manipulate any object around the board, you can click and drag it with the left mouse button. For example, I can pick up this card and place it into the discard pile here. I can grab a new card out of this deck and put it into the marketplace. Now, when an object has a number over it, that means it's part of a stack or a deck. For example, this deck has 151 cards in it. This stack of tokens has 16 tokens in it. If I want to grab just one token, I'll just click and drag, and that'll take one off the top there. And I can always put that back by holding my mouse over and waiting until it glows orange, and then releasing. I've now put that token back in the stack. This also applies to decks of cards. For example, I can grab this, mouse over until it turns orange, and then release, and that card is now back on top of the stack. Sometimes it's easier to pick up multiple objects at once. To do this, I'll hold my Shift key down and click on multiple objects. When I now click and drag them, they'll all drag as a unit. I can also release them as a unit. You can also hold down the Shift key and drag a box around any objects you want to select. This will select them all, and you can now click and drag one of them to drag them and move them as a unit. In a lot of games, cards will be one of the objects you interact with the most, and there are a couple of things you can do with them. For example, some cards may need to be flipped. To do this, I'll mouse over a card and press F. I can also press F again to flip it back. Now, you'll also sometimes need private information or a card in your hand, and Tabletopia has a built-in hand function for this very purpose. To put a card into your hand so only you can see it, you'll want to click and drag the card, drag it to the bottom of your screen, and you'll now see that my screen is glowing. And once it's glowing, you're going to release, and now this card comes with me in my hand. You can add multiple cards to your hand. You can even add multiple cards at once into your hand. And these cards are all now here, available for me to access. But they're a bit small, and that's okay. If at any point in Tabletopia you want to bring an object into focus so it's more legible to read, simply mouse over it and press the spacebar. And this will bring the object up full screen. You can press spacebar again to dismiss this. This also works for objects that are still on the table. Now, when cards are in your hand, they're visible only to you until you drag them out and put them back on the board. While in your hand, you can also select multiple cards by holding the Shift key. You can also right-click on any of the cards, select the Select All function, and then you can also right-click, select the Flip function. This is very useful if you need to place a card back onto the table but face down, because it will retain its flip. Now, board games wouldn't be as much fun if we couldn't roll dice, and dice are something you will interact with a lot on Tabletopia. You can click and drag dice and move them like any other object, but if you would like to roll dice, mouse over them and press the R key. Sometimes you'll also need to set dice, and to do this you can right-click on a die, move to the Set To function, and this will set it to the appropriate face. Some games on Tabletopia will have counters, and these are typically used for counting resources or other large stacks of tokens where you'd rather not have big piles. In this case, you can manipulate a counter by scrolling up or down on the mouse wheel, and this will let you set it to whatever numeral it needs to be. You can also right-click and modify it by a specified amount by clicking on that amount. If you ever need to rotate an object on Tabletopia, you can simply mouse over it and hit the Q or E buttons. These will rotate the card or object in 90-degree increments. In a lot of games, it may be necessary to move between different spaces of the board that are far apart. To make this easier, you can set custom camera angles. For example, in Wingspan, I need to recall my player board quite often, and so I'm going to set it as my first custom camera angle. To do this, I'll hold Shift and press 1. I've now saved that as a camera angle. Another frequent place I might need to visit is the market, so I might make this my second camera angle. To do this, I'll press Shift and 2. And now, if I'd like to recall either of those camera angles, I press their appropriate numerical key. For example, to go to my player board, I press 1. To go to the market, I press 2. And you can set this up to 1 through 9, so you have 9 available options for custom camera angles. And of course, default in every game is the 0 key, which takes you to an overview of the entire game. Just a tip. If at any point you're stuck or not sure how you can interact with an object, you can right-click on that object to bring up its context menu. This radial menu will show you the available options for that object. As you can see here, on a die I can flip, I can roll, and I can set it. On this card, I can flip it, I can rotate, or I can lock it. If you also need to refresh what these controls do, don't forget you can click the question mark down here, and that'll take you to an overview of every control available on Tabletopia.